Hello, Warbirders! If you enjoy this program, come on over and join us at the World of Warbirds Patreon. There's plenty of free stuff there, including all the images to accompany the episodes so that you can see what I'm talking about. If you want to commit to the relationship, there are advantages to being a patron of the podcast, such as getting the episodes earlier and getting bonus episodes, and you'll have the satisfaction of helping contribute to the podcast. If you are presently listening to this through Patreon, well then thank you for your support. Now on to today's show. Hello, and welcome to World of Warbirds. I'm Brian Pierce. So Warbirders, here is our final episode in our Grumman Cat series. Well, I should qualify that. Welcome to the last episode in our piston-powered Grumman Cat series. Stay tuned at the end of the show for a brief discussion on our Warbird era. I'm looking for some help to make a decision. So, if you recall, we skipped over the F7F and went straight to the F8F Bearcat in the last episode. I thought it would be best to do all the single-engine Grumman Cats first to show the through line and the evolution. Also, it made sense to compare the Hellcat and Bearcat back to back as they showed such contrasting philosophies, but yet were both highly successful in their own rights. It just goes to show that, as the old expression goes, there is more than one way to skin a cat. Although I've always wondered why anyone would want to skin a cat anyway. So, although Grumman had produced a series of not only winning, but war-winning single-engine naval aircraft, it also seemed to have an unceasing obsession, an itch that it couldn't quite reach, to build a twin-engine naval fighter. And Grumman, if anything, was stubborn. It had tried with the F7F. In 1937, the Navy had put out a requirement for a fighter with a weight of less than 9,000 pounds and overall speed to be as fast as possible. And Grumman had responded with the F7F. Now, in the course of working on this podcast, I've studied many a strange-looking flying machine, and this one ranks right up there. The two 1,200 horsepower Wright R1820 engines, which would rotate in opposite directions to cancel out each other's torque, were mounted way out in front, and the blunt nose fuselage is so far back that there was actually a section of leading edge of the wing in front of the nose. The fuselage was pretty stubby, with a horizontal stabilizer that had a pronounced dihedral and twin fins. Depending on what turns you crank, commentators have either said it looked ugly, just weird, or sexy. I guess if you're into the kinky stuff. It did climb like a homesick angel, so got the non-cat name of Skyrocket, but was cancelled after only one prototype due to a variety of matters. For the full story of the Skyrocket, go ahead and join Patreon, or look for the video on the World of Warbirds YouTube channel. But Grumman never gave up on the twin-engine fighter. They actually worked on another prototype for the Army called the XP-50 Interceptor. It was ordered by the U.S. Army Air Corps on March 11, 1939. It was basically a skyrocket, but with a longer, sleeker nose. Within that nose would be nestled two 20mm cannon and two 50 caliber machine guns, and its two engines were turbo supercharged. The XP-50 was doing well until its untimely demise when one of those turbo superchargers blew up, damaging the landing gear, causing the right landing gear to be stuck down and the nose gear to be stuck up. Does that mean it was snobby? I'm sorry about that. With the test pilot unable to do either a belly or normal landing, he bailed out and the skyrocket went into the waters of Long Island Sound along with the hopes for Grumman's twin-engine fighter. No, not really. The obsession actually continued. Grumman was already working on another twin-engine follow-up to the Skyrocket / XP-50 that was called, internally within the company, as the Grumman G51. Let's take a closer look at what they were working on. The G-51 would be powered by two Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp air-cooled 18-cylinder radial engines that cranked out 1,700 horsepower each. These engines would be contained in nacelles, partly hanging under the wings. The mid-mounted wings were thick with a straight leading edge, tapered trailing edge, and significant dihedral. The fuselage was to be quite narrow but tall, with the cockpit just in front of the leading edge of the wing. It was to use tricycle landing gear. The hope was that this basic design could be modified to produce fighters for use by both the U.S. Army Air Corps and the U.S. Navy. For high-altitude work, the Army version would need turbo superchargers, hopefully of the non-exploding variety this time. The Navy version would pass on the turbo superchargers, but would need arrestor hooks and folding wings for carrier operations. Both the Army and the Navy were interested in the design, but it was the USAAC that first placed an order for a prototype on the 19th of May 1941. The next month, in June 1941, the Navy ordered a prototype too, designating the experimental aircraft F7F1. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, it was decided to simplify and streamline things for wartime production. The Army and the Navy weren't agreeing on what they wanted for the twin-engine fighter, so it was decided that Grumman would focus on what it did best, making naval aircraft. And so the Army version was cancelled in January 1942, but the F7F1 got the green light to continue to the prototype stage. So the good news was that on the 30th of June 1941, a contract for two XF7F prototypes were ordered. The bad news was that on the very same day, two prototype XF6F1, the aircraft that would become known as the Hellcat, were also ordered. Why was this bad for the F7F? Because the Hellcat was deemed to be priority. And there was only so much design and engineering capacity, and so the F7F was pushed to the back burner. And there it sat for almost a year until spring 1943, when engineering work began in earnest. And by September, they had a mock-up. And what a mock-up it was! If the theme of the Hellcat was big but well-balanced, zero killer, and the Bearcat was less is more, the theme of the F7F would have to be bigger is better, or more is most, or something like that, because this bird was going to be a beast. Kind of like a tiger, and it was named the Tigercat. Grumman had also tried to call this one a tomcat, but again, some prudes had decided that the tomcat was too sexy for the time, and so Tigercat was chosen. As I've said before, Grumman was a stubborn company, and eventually they would get to use the name Tomcat, but they were going to have to wait a bit. At 45 feet 4 inches long, the Tigercat was 12 feet longer than the Hellcat, which was a big bird to begin with, and had 9 more feet of wingspan, and 3 more feet of height. Its empty weight tipped the scales at about 16,000 pounds, while the Hellcat's was just above 9,000 pounds. Let's put it this way, the Tigercat would weigh as much as a Hellcat plus a Bearcat combined. Now at least the Tigercat had a lot of power to haul it around. It didn't have double the weight of the Hellcat, but it did have double the power, with two Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp, 18-cylinder air-cooled radial piston engines churning out 2,100 horsepower each. Now for all this bulk and power, you'd hope to be able to do a lot with the aircraft, and it was set up with the ability to hand out punishment on a surprising scale. Without a pesky engine in the nose, there was space to put in a lot of guns. There were 4 50 caliber machine guns in the nose, and before anyone starts whining about cannon, yeah, it had them too. 4 20mm cannon were placed in the wing roots. Okay, so those would be great for dogfighting and strafing, but what else did it have? From the very beginning, the Tigercat was designed to hand out serious pain. Racks and rails could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs or 8 127mm rockets under the wings. The tricycle landing gear gave enough clearance directly under the belly for the Tigercat to carry a torpedo or a napalm bomb or a 150-gallon fuel tank or a kitchen sink. Just joking. Or am I? The prototype made its maiden flight November 1943, and some changes were requested, including increasing the vertical fin and the rudder height. Further testing revealed worries over the Tigercat's directional control if it lost an engine during a carrier launch or during a wave-off condition on landing. But the flight test reports also stated that, opening quotes, in addition to its potentialities as a night fighter, this airplane is the best medium-altitude day fighter Army, Navy, or foreign yet evaluated. Close quotes. The test pilots were very impressed that even with its large size, the Tigercat provided increased speed. For example, 70 miles per hour faster than its sister Hellcat, while carrying the heavy armament of 4 50 caliber nose guns, while carrying 4 20mm wing cannon. On the other hand, the Tigercat had worrying spin characteristics. The Wildcat and Hellcat had been tested to 10-turn spins and would recover quickly. On the other hand, the Tigercat was initially tested only up to 2 turns, because those would take 2 full turns for it to reluctantly recover. And even then, it had the tendency for the nose to rise up and the spin to turn flat, which might prove unrecoverable. The Navy ended up writing in the pilot's handbook, all spins and snap rolls are prohibited maneuvers in the F7F aircraft. Later on, a military test pilot did try to fully spin a Tigercat. As predicted, the spin went flat at the 4th turn, and it continued to flat spin for 20 more unrecoverable turns until it hit the ground, killing the test pilot. But even so, the type was plenty promising enough for an order of 500 to be written up, and Grumman started building them. The Tigercat was ordered with the intention of being operated from the forthcoming 45,000-ton carriers of the Midway class. The first production Tigercats flew out of the factory in April 1944. This production run had the type configured as night fighters with an APS-6 radar in the nose, and soon a place for a radar operator's position was added behind the pilot, and the first few dozen Tigercats would be built as night fighters. In fact, the majority of the type would be used in this role, and due to the end of the war and the coming of the jets, only about 360 Tigercats were ever built. When it comes to operational history, the slightly disappointing thing that needs to be said was that there were problems in getting this carrier fighter on an actual aircraft carrier. The first was that the Navy wanted a swiveling tailhook, and the Tigercat's hook was a new Y-frame configuration that the Navy found to be unacceptable. And so initially Tigercats went to shore-based Marine squadrons. So these Marine squadrons began Tigercat combat training in mid-1944. F7F-2N night fighters were issued to the Marines on Guam in summer 1945, and these flew with Marine Night Fighter Squadron 531 and arrived in Okinawa just as the war ended. Also, a Marine Photo Recon Squadron started working up in March 1945, this also reaching Okinawa by VJ Day. Other Photo Recon Tigercat squadrons began operating in China, employed in mapping the coast. Meanwhile, back in the Navy, the Tigercat's minimum controllable and single-engine failure takeoff speed was 40 miles per hour faster than was the Navy requirement. This was worrying, but the Tigercat's otherwise excellent performance and flight characteristics convinced the Navy to make an exception. In February 1946, Tigercats went aboard the Shangri-La for carrier qualifications. It must have been frustrating as heck when, after repeated carrier landings, an inner wing panel of one of the Tigercats failed on touchdown, causing the type to fail its qualification. However, I did say the Grumman was stubborn, and they went back to work on the Tigercat, and the final result was the F7F-4N. It had a strengthened airframe, a modified tailhook, and a more robust landing gear. It did pass its carrier qualification, although marginally, and never ended up being a standard carrier-based aircraft. They only built 12 of this variant. However, Tigercats got another task when some were modified to be drone control motherships. These had a rear cockpit for the drone control pilot installed. Interestingly, it was a F7F Bearcat type canopy for him. So would that make this a Tiger Bearcat? With the outbreak of the Korean War, this kitty finally got a chance to taste actual blood when two squadrons of Tigercats, VMF N513 and 542, flew night interdiction, fighter, and ground support missions in the early months of the conflict. Following their withdrawal from the war, Tigercats were gradually phased out and the type was formally retired in 1954. Because the Tigercat didn't fly much in combat, we don't have a list of pilots who became aces or who have many exceptional stories about the exploits of this bird. What we do have are the words of Captain Eric Melrose Winklebrown, who was a British Royal Navy test pilot who, during his career, flew over 480 different types of aircraft. So he had plenty of experience and background and comparisons in mind when he penned the following tribute to the Tigercat. Open quotes. The Tigercat had never had the opportunity to demonstrate what it could do in combat, and by the time it did see operational service, the era of the jet fighter was already thoroughly established. The vast majority of the Tigercats built were thus destined to languish in rear areas or with reserve units without ever having an opportunity to realize their full potential. If the Tigercat had shortcomings in the shipboard role for which it was conceived, it was nevertheless a very good aeroplane indeed. But less was scarcely to be expected from those responsible for such as the Wildcat and Hellcat. It was robust, it was comfortable, and it offered an excellent performance. It deserves to be better remembered. Close quotes. And dear Warbirders, I hope we're doing that here. Following Korea, many Tigercats became firefighters in the civilian world. They certainly had plenty of power to haul and drop flame retardant in a new series of battles, this time against the primordial element of fire. These firefighting Tigercats still looked fairly sleek, even with the installation of a belly pod to carry the firefighting fluid. When I first saw a photo of a Tigercat modified in this way, my immediate thought was, yup, even this beautiful kitty can put on a little bit of weight and a bit of a pot during middle age. The nice thing about the firefighting role was that it kept these cats working and flying during the years when many World War II warbirds got scrapped. And once their second careers were coming to an end, there was now demand for these Tigercats in private collections and museums, which means that the type is well represented. Airworthy ones can be seen at the National Museum of World War II Aviation in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and at Lewis Air Legends in San Antonio, Texas, amongst other locations. There are Tigercats on display at the National Naval Aviation Museum in Naval Air Station, Pensacola, Florida, at the Plains of Fame Air Museum in Chino, California, and the Pima Air and Space Museum in Tucson, Arizona. That brings us to the end of our series on Grumman cats. Or does it? Since I began this podcast 3 years ago, my era has been to look at aircraft that were designed, built, or served during the World War II period. So, for example, an aircraft could be finishing up its career at the start of the war, and so be included. as would anything that was designed or built during the World War II years, but arrived too late for combat, such as the Tigercat. What would not apply would be the Grumman Panther, Cougar, Jaguar, and yes, the Tomcats. In my opinion, I've always thought that the old prop and piston birds had more character, but maybe I'm just being prejudiced. And maybe I need to expand my horizons. And lately I've had some pressure from some quarters to expand my era, especially during this cat series. I've been almost told that to not include the jet cats, especially the Tomcat, is almost an affront to the aviation universe, and that I should open my mind and expand my era. So, dear listeners, what do you think? I value your opinion. Should we delve beyond the piston bangers of World War II? Let me know through the various commenting or messaging services, and I'll get back to you on what I decide. Lastly, I'd like to include a possible correction. A former employee of Grumman, who says he served as their historian, reached out to me to let me know that the Bearcat was never actually considered for the Tomcat name and that only the Tigercat ever was. I cannot confirm either way, but I just wanted to include this information here to let you know that there is uncertainty before someone gets in a fistfight at an air show over Tomcat trivia. Thanks to all who support the podcast through Patreon or through PayPal. I appreciate it more than you know. Actually, this episode is the first to be recorded on a new laptop with new recording equipment. So thank you so much. You can also check out some photos of what we've been talking about on the Patreon page. These are available to all for free. Until next time.